The impact on our communities has been very different than white communities. It ripples out. People talk about harm reduction, but they don't understand what social justice movement really means and equity really means. The big change is when we started taking federal money, then we started letting the federal government dictate what harm reduction looks like.
You're listening to Narcotica, a podcast giving you the straight dope about drugs and the people who use them.
What is harm reduction? Is it a group of people, a movement, a set of steps to follow? Is it a philosophy? Is it a political movement or a public health practice? I have heard people describe harm reduction in so many different ways, and the number of those ways seems to have doubled in just the last 5 years. Is harm reduction mandatorily drug screening people to protect them from themselves? Or how about busting drug dealers? Isn't that reducing harm by eliminating the poisons? Then we have folks who reduce it to catchphrases and tropes. Harm reduction is love. Harm reduction is meeting people where they're at. And later, harm reduction is whatever you say it is. The more we use words, the less meaning they seem to hold. But today's episode is a step in the direction of clarity on some of these questions. I'm Aaron Ferguson, and you're listening to Narcotica. We're joined by Joy Rucker today, a true legend in harm reduction who you may or may not have heard of. If you haven't, you definitely should have, because Joy has been on the barricades doing this work in a way like few others have, and for longer than most. Joy started off in the HIV activism space and brought her fire and passion to harm reduction in the 1990s, opening drop-in centers and harm reduction spaces across the country when few else were, and in places that were even outright racist and hostile. Joy has a won't-quit attitude, the likes of which is so often the only path to success with social justice. She's the co-founder of the National Black Harm Reduction Network, and is a thought leader in the activism community. Joy is someone who tells it like it is in a way that we need more of. Our conversation touches on the topics of harm reduction's adoption among black communities, harm reduction purism, the effects of federal involvement and funding, how underlying attitudes toward people of color and people who use drugs impact harm reduction, its intersection with attitudes about physical and mental health, what has or hasn't changed over the years, and much more. And now we give you Joy Rucker. Thanks for joining us today, folks. This is Aaron Ferguson, and I'm really excited about the interview today. We're going to be joined by Joy Rucker, and so thanks so much for joining us, Joy.
Thank you for having me.
Let's also invite the main person that you're used to hearing on this podcast, Troy, who's beaming in. How you doing today, Troy?
I'm doing really well. It's been very beautiful. The bugs are gone this summer, so it's good to go outside at night again. And I'm just enjoying West Illinois.
Nice. I hope the weather's better there than it is down here. Joy and I both know from working in Texas, this is a horrible time of year. We're lucky if it gets down below 80, for the next 2 months. But now I'm already having flashbacks and I'm getting ahead of myself. So, I've been thinking that I wanted to have you on the podcast for a long time. Joy and I have done a lot of work together. We worked together in Texas early on when she was founding the Texas Harm Reduction Alliance. But Joy had been at that for a very long time before we met, and was already, in my mind, a legend in this work, just from the time and effort put in. So I really want to kind of start from the beginning today. I wanted to ask Joy a little bit about, just from the beginning, what brings you into, or what has brought you into harm reduction? And then we can just start talking about all the stuff that's happened since then.
Okay. I got introduced to harm reduction actually through HIV prevention. Um, I was, I wasn't really doing HIV prevention work. I was living in Provincetown, and when all my gay male friends, they became sick, and we didn't quite understand what was going on. But we knew there were no resources. This is before Ryan White. There was before funding, before anything. So just as a community, we took care of the guys that lived in Provincetown, my friends. And then I moved to Boston, and I was still, I worked in substance use recovery field, and I worked in a treatment program, and they would not allow anyone with HIV to come into the treatment program because everybody was so afraid of how you catch it. And, it was all that stigma and fear. And really, because I was not afraid and I already knew I couldn't get it, by just being near someone, or I understood how it was transmitted, I became the HIV expert because I knew more about the virus. I knew more about the medications and the symptoms. So I became the educator in in the program I worked in, and from there, I got a job in Boston for doing education around the state and detox programs, treatment programs, recovery houses, to help people to understand that you could actually provide treatment for people that had HIV and that contracted it from injecting drugs. So really just by default, I fell into harm reduction. And then this guy that I knew really well, in recovery, we were doing a training course together, and he was talking about syringe exchange. And at that point, I was really very focused on recovery. I didn't understand syringe exchange. And he asked me if I believed that people could relapse in recovery. And I said, yes, I know that's true. And he said, well, if I relapse, I don't want to infect anyone. And so I think that I should be able to use a clean syringe. And that was the first time I got it. It was like, right, this makes perfect sense for me. And really, that was my introduction to harm reduction and syringe exchange, the beginning of my career in harm reduction.
It's interesting that you said you kind of fell into harm reduction, because I feel like that's what a lot of people have happened to them lately, and this whole crisis that we have now. And I know a little bit from reading about the history of ACT UP and HIV and AIDS activism that, like, a lot of people, saw the virus as like, that's someone else's problem, until it affected somebody that was in their family or a loved one, or a friend. And then it's like, suddenly these people became radicalized and kind of like, really had to take up the mantle for these people that were suffering, and the government was ignoring them. And the HIV and AIDS story really does dovetail nicely with harm reduction. Like, we probably wouldn't have syringe access as much if it wasn't for communicable disease. And syringe access is seen as sort of a no nonsense. It's like a really basic program for a lot of places. Obviously not everywhere. It's under attack, and we can get into that a little bit. But it's also just sort of like, we'll give you a syringe so you don't hurt someone else by spreading HIV. but they don't really care about people who use drugs in the broader sense. So I also see that a lot. Like someone loses a family member to overdose, and now suddenly they're like getting into harm reduction, or they can go the other way. They can go the other way where they're standing in front of a bunch of cops at a press release saying we've got to catch all the fentanyl traffickers and screw the immigrants and all this other stuff, right? So like, do you agree? Do you see that sort of trend happening again?
Yeah, I see it happening again. I don't think it's ever gone away. It's been my experience that there has always been stigma attached to drug use. There was always stigma attached to HIV. There is always stigma to gay people. There is always stigma to people of color. So it is just another layer of stigma that was laid upon people that already were experiencing stigma from the larger structural network that we all have to negotiate in some way.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's like, that was actually going to be one of my next questions was, from you over the years that you've been doing this, what have you seen that has stayed the same, and what have you seen that has changed? And that's, it's kind of two questions, right? It's like, but it also, I think, maybe says a lot about the movement itself, or maybe some of the underlying things that we're talking about.
I think that there are some of us that are purists around harm reduction. And then there are other people that have come in after the purists, the originals, that now accept harm reduction in this watered down version. They think harm reduction is handing out naloxone, period. And that's as far as they'll go. And they don't, to me, there's no pushback on the government or local entities about what is the most effective thing for the people that we're serving. So I think that there are some places that are staying true to the harm reduction philosophy and delivery of services that says, we will meet you where you're at and we will provide whatever you need to stay safe. And so usually those programs are under the radar. They're not tied to federal funding. That's the big change, is when we started taking federal money, then we started letting the federal government dictate what harm reduction looks like.
Yeah, and I honestly think that's very dangerous. I know a lot of people are kind of just like getting this whiplash. Like, harm reduction was this sort of underground movement, a grassroots movement, and now suddenly it's been institutionalized. And the Biden administration is the first one to even like use harm reduction as a term in like public health funding. But it carries all these consequences. Can we talk a little bit about that? Like, how do we prevent that from happening, first of all? Like, and I know a lot of people even like don't even want to use the term harm reduction anymore, because it's like there's something they practice, but it's not like, it's hard to identify with the whole movement sometimes now.
Yeah, well, I'm such a purist. I'm always going to use harm reduction because that's all I know. And I'm not of the mindset that what people are doing is necessarily harm reduction. I think they're doing SAMHSA's bidding, CDC's bidding. And I remember when those agencies could not be in the same room with us talking about harm reduction. So it's always amazing to me that the government entity that could not be in the same room with us when we were talking about harm reduction in the beginning have now become the experts on what harm reduction looks like, and that they want to hire the harm reductionists to train other service providers on how to do harm reduction. So I'm just, I stay old school because I don't believe what we're doing is saving lives in the way that we need to.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Like the first time I saw naloxone, me and a group of friends, we were hanging out in a VW van, just getting loaded, and the cops rolled up. I was like 16 or something in Santa Cruz, California. And Joy and I know some of the same folks who used to run the drop-in center that I lived on the roof of there. But the cops came through, and a friend of mine had a vial of Narcan around his neck. And it was like novel back then. It was like, wow, man, you got Narcan. And the cops came through and they arrested a bunch of us, arrested him, told him it was illegal to have Narcan in his possession, charged us with a bunch of different stuff. But that was the first time I ever saw it, was cops saying, like, this is not allowed. And then, when I'm at these like press releases where the police are standing in front of, 40% of the Narcan that's been given from the health department, from half of the funds from the opioid settlement or from opioid response. And they're like, this is a thing we're doing now. Yeah, it took us a while, but, it just blows my fucking mind.
To me, police have no business providing Narcan. They're the last people that should be called. And when I do overdose prevention trainings, I always say, call and say someone's not breathing. And then you get the paramedics there. You don't necessarily get the police. And so if you say someone has overdose, that's when you get the police. And so just say someone is not breathing, and the paramedics will come and they will provide, hopefully, compassionate care. I don't, because the police have now decided to use naloxone as a life-saving drug. I don't think the entire police force has changed their view on criminalization of drug use. So, it's sort of like a two-edged sword. I'm going to call the very people that could arrest me to save me.
I guess we can put that into the bucket of things that hasn't changed since harm reduction came around. It's like this colloquial common knowledge, like, you have to report it in a certain way. And it's like I've started referring to it as self-help healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah. Quality of life improvement. That's, it's like drug user health. That's how I look at it. It's like, okay, I'm not attached, to the wording. I am attached to the principles and the philosophy, though.
Yeah, 100%. Harm reduction, it's so weird to see it become institutionalized now, but like, when it was first originating 30, 40 years ago, or even earlier, it was kind of catering towards white people mostly, right? So I know you've done work on the Black Harm Reduction Coalition. Can you tell us a little bit about, I know this sounds stupid, but like, why was it necessary? I guess, yeah, is the question.
Well, you just answered your question. That harm reduction was started by a bunch of white people. And that hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And, white people came into Black communities talking about harm reduction without talking to the community about what they needed. So for me, they put the rest of us at a disadvantage of educating our community on the importance of harm reduction. Nobody likes white saviors coming into your community telling you what you need, and you live there. So, and what we've done throughout the years is try to take the model and adapt it to the needs of Black communities. And why we developed the Black Harm Reduction, the National Black Harm Reduction Network, is because we know that harm reduction has not been grounded in our culture, in our values, and what our community needs. So we have a healing process that has to happen parallel to introducing naloxone and pipes and syringe exchange into Black communities, because they were devastated by the crack epidemic. And so everybody wants to know, well, where were all the good white people then? Why weren't they riding into our community to save us then? So it was someone else's problem. And then the laws were created to incarcerate Black people at a stiffer sentence for crack rather than cocaine. So that is the reason why we created the National Black Harm Reduction Network, because the impact on our communities has been very different than white communities. It ripples out. So it's not just people overdosing or staying, not contracting or getting any kind of infectious disease. It is your rights are taken away. You're incarcerated. You cannot vote. You cannot get housing. You cannot get money for school. This impacts so many areas of Black people's lives that harm reduction in its principles says it's about social justice, but I have not seen white agencies push the social justice agenda, because that would mean a shift in leadership and power. And so in order to do real social justice work, you have to be prepared to shift.
Yeah. Yeah. It almost strikes me as similar to missionaries going into some tribe overseas and trying to preach the gospel without bringing anything to feed folks or anything to trade or anything tangible that could benefit that tribe. It's just, we're just here to spread the gospel, and we'll hang out and help you build a couple shelters and give you a few water bottles, and then we're going to be on our way. And it seems like so much of harm reduction when it comes to Black community just gets passed over. It's not even mentioned. It's like this ambient level of stigma, like you were earlier mentioning, that's always there. No one acknowledges it. And everyone just assumes that because we're doing harm reduction, we're doing social justice. Those two things have become, they're politically intertwined now. It's social justice and sort of the left have been associated with harm reduction more so. And so everyone just assumes it's we're doing this social justice thing because we're doing harm reduction. It just never even gets mentioned.
Well, because it doesn't get mentioned because there isn't anything to point to. There isn't anything to point to. I've been in this, I've been in this field, in this movement since the beginning, and it was dominated by white men. And, funders that came to the table to fund harm reduction programs would not fund a Black-led harm reduction movement. Amani Woods was one of the first African-American women that was out front talking about harm reduction in the Black community. And her vision was to create a Black harm reduction network, right? A national harm reduction network. So we wrote vision, mission statements, and, we had a whole membership, right? And then we approached a funder, and they said, we'll give you $50,000 for seed money, but Amani Woods cannot be your spokesperson. So we were like, you know what? Keep your money. You don't get to tell us who our spokesperson is.
Yeah, that's fucked up.
Yeah, it was fucked up. It was fucked up. It was just like, oh my God, are you kidding me? And, so of course, during that time, we were all young and we all had full-time jobs. So nobody had the time to dedicate to building the Black harm reduction movement. And so over the years, we have been able to carve out a couple of hours here when the Harm Reduction Coalition has their conference. They'll give us a couple of hours so all the Black people can meet and we can talk about the issues that we already know that we have. But really, it's a place for us to come together and talk about what are we going to do, because we are getting left out of this process. And so finally, over the years, we finally got to a place. It was like, what are we going to do? We need to be our own entity. We need to create our own TA model and coaching model for up and coming leaders. And we need to push the political agenda and find someone that will champion harm reduction in the Black community, which we don't have.
Yeah. And it's one of the things that's always stood out to me about harm reduction is that it doesn't necessarily grapple with the war on drugs, if we want to call it that, or the war on people. We call it a genocide in drug user organizing, because in a war, both sides have casualties. In this one, it's casualties are all on our end. But there's nothing necessarily about harm reduction that has to address drugs being illegal and stigmatized and the racial component of that. But it seems like once we venture into the topic of racism, the topic of structural racism, we can't avoid talking about that. And maybe that's some of what folks are shy about, is acknowledging like that there's this thing that we're trying to slap Band-Aids on with all these different interventions. You wouldn't need Narcan if you could buy drugs at a quality rate and supply up, pretty much anywhere, or find a safe way to use. In the same way as alcohol or other drugs. But we're not having that conversation because I don't know that a lot of harm reduction practices necessitate it. But, what you're saying, it's like we can't avoid it.
We can't avoid it because we live with it. And, for me, the shift came after George Floyd was killed. And then it was all about, racial equity and so that became the movement. But even within our own movement, if you noticed, prior to Monique Tula becoming the executive director of the National Harm Reduction Coalition, every major leadership position was filled by a white male. And Monique was the first woman of color, to lead a national harm reduction organization. And as soon as she started talking about racial equity, people boycotted the conference, quit working for the National Harm Reduction Coalition. So, people talk about harm reduction, but they don't understand what social justice movement really means and equity really means.
Yeah, I would say that a lot of the political activism that came out of George Floyd and the protests that summer were pretty performative. Like there's all this talk about racial justice and everything, and defunding the police and that sort of stuff. But like 4 years later, I can't really say how much progress has been made. And another thing that I really don't see being discussed very much is drug war reparations, like reparations for slavery. Like that is just common sense to me if you look at anything in history. But that also needs to be reparations for the drug war. And some like cannabis legalization laws, they'll put expungements in and those sorts of things. And if you're lucky that the law wasn't written by big businesses that want to, capitalize on selling weed. I don't know, like, why is drug war reparations not a bigger part of the conversation?
Well, not even drug war. Let's talk about opioid settlement money. That that is not coming into the Black community.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We have my co-director is appointed to the New York Opioid Settlement Board, whatever. But she is one of the only Black voices there that are pushing for that money to come into communities. That money's going to the police. That money's going to the fire department. That money is going everywhere but the community. And so we're in a country that doesn't give a shit about drug users, no matter what color they are. You know, there's like, oh, we got all this money because all these people died. So here's a chance for us to build out our police force, or this, or that, but nothing is coming down. By the time it gets to the community, it'll be like, yeah, there's probably 100,000 for you guys out of millions.
And Big Pharma is profiting too, you know, with Narcan and some of these newer formulations that are higher dose, like Cloxato, or there's the Nalmefene Opvi thing that's like, just seems like a nightmare. Yeah, I hate what's happening with the opioid settlement money, because it's such an opportunity that's been wasted. And it's like, when are you going to get this again, you know?
Yeah, it's always been, there's not enough money, there's not enough resources, and now all of a sudden it's there, and look what we're doing with it, you know? It's frustrating.
Yeah, we're squandering it again. And, you know, so it just goes, and to me, where is the activism and where's the social justice part of this harm reduction movement that should be kicking down the doors and demanding that this money comes back to the community? You know, I just, you know, the whole thing about pushing this new overdose prevention medication at a higher dose is just being pushed by the pharmaceutical company. There isn't anything medically that says it's more successful. In fact, it says it's more harmful for the person.
Yeah, we have a tradition of that as well with urine drug screening. There's a massive market for urine drug screening in this country, despite a complete vacuum of evidence of any science showing its benefit. And it's just something we do. And it blows my mind.
You know, this country is into social control, you know, and I remember doing this presentation to these parole officers and probation officers and, you know, saying I didn't believe in urinalysis. And the woman said, well, why not? And I said, well, what does it prove to you? You know, if your person is showing up and doing what they're supposed to do, isn't that proof enough that their life is changing? Having a urinalysis is not going to reinforce that, or if it comes up that they've been using drugs, that doesn't mean that their life has gone downhill. So I don't understand the humiliation that is associated with having someone piss in a bottle to say, I'm having a better quality of life. See, my urine says so. The fact that I have a job, the fact that I'm back with my family, the fact that I'm part of the community, I'm addressing my substance use issues in a way that makes sense for me, isn't proof enough. So it's stupid.
Yeah. It's always been really encouraging to me to hear you talk about all of these things, Joy, because you have such a sense of clarity and you're willing to say what needs to be said. And I hope that our listeners can hear that in you. It's almost like you can hear somebody who's lived this and has deeply absorbed it versus someone who is trying to adopt it and force it and is maybe intellectually engaged. But I want our listeners to hear a little bit about your experiences because you've been doing this for so long, and you've opened many clinics and you've started this thing new in new neighborhoods. You've had to operate in a lot of different climates, in a lot of places that were maybe hostile even to harm reduction, or very racist environments. And so I think folks would just love to hear anything that jumps out to you about your past experiences and what you might have seen or learned from them.
Well, I would say my biggest learning experience in this work came when I was opening the syringe exchange program in Oakland. We had a center, a drop-in center that was located near a BART station. BART is the public, the train system in San Francisco in the Bay Area. And so we were right in the middle of a redevelopment operation to redevelop the whole Fruitvale area, because Fruitvale was, was known for prostitution. It was known for drugs, just crime, everything. And so the city council person that was in that district, he hated us and he wanted us to move, and we wouldn't move. And so our drop-in center got firebombed over New Year's. So, it was arson, of course, but never investigated. So we're operating out of a burnt out building in the parking lot because nobody will rent to us.
Wow.
Because of the arson, because we're all in the newspaper, and people were like, oh, hell no, we're not going to rent to you. You guys are going to get burned down. So we had to reorganize ourselves and move out of the community and just provide mobile services, right?
Wow.
So we moved our offices out of Fruitvale, and we kept all the supplies in my studio apartment in Oakland, right? And so, we were basically working out of, my studio apartment, coming and getting all the supplies, loading up the trucks, and going out and providing syringe services at our mobile clinics. And at the same time, there was tobacco tax settlement money that came into the county. And by this time, we had garnered enough credibility and respect from the county and their understanding that we were not going away, and that we had actually reduced the rate of HIV infection in Alameda County to 14%. As opposed to 20%, rate. So they had this tobacco tax settlement money, and the county put an RFP out for capital programs, which meant you could buy a building, right? So we applied for the money, and we got some money to buy a building. So we found this building in in East Oakland, where we had done analysis of the zip codes of the people that came to our exchange, and the biggest, and where was the largest rate of folks concentrated, and it was in that zip code. So we find this building, it's just run down. We go inside, and there's a mattress in there. So there's some crack pipes. There's some come fuck me pumps, there's some condoms. So we're like, perfect. This is the spot, right? So we buy the building. And so the city councilman that it was in our district, we let him know. And he was like, okay, fine. And then the neighbors, got wind of it, and they organized against us. And so it was a 2-year battle for us to open our site. And the city, we had to go to the city council meeting. I felt like I was there every night. And we had to advocate for us. And what we did was we partnered with other social justice activists that came to the city council meeting on our behalf, and we packed the place. And so finally, because we wouldn't go away and we wore them down, it was finally like, one city council member said, you know what? Ignacio de la Fuentes, who's the president of the council, and this other city council member, she said, de la Fuentes, you need to sit down with the representatives of Casa Segura and work this out. And so we finally were able to meet with him and work out, like, what were your concerns, all that stuff. And so as it turned out, even though we still had a process to go through, they created what we call the Casa Segura ordinance that said you cannot provide services to people that are using illegal drugs unless you apply for a conditional use permit. And so we had to apply for a conditional use permit. And we did it. And we went before the board, and the planning board, and, we had a lot of support, and we did it. And we bought the building and we rehabbed it. It did not stop our neighbors from harassing us. The neighborhood watch or whatever they were, they threatened me. I would get voicemails at home just leaving threatening messages,
Wow.
Right. So the worst opponent was our next door neighbor, which was a church. And so they hated us. And so the mother of the church said to me one day, you need to move because the word on the street is that they're going to burn you down. And I said, well, my building is attached to your building. I know your building is worth more than $1 million. So it would behoove you to have a conversation with the folks who are saying they're going to burn us down. Because if we go down, so do you.
Wow.
So that's the kind of, harassment that we got. And they put all these conditions on us that we could not do syringe exchange out of our site. We had to keep it mobile, blah, 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 blah. But you know what? A year after us being there, they started inviting us to the community street outreach health fairs. We became a resource in the community, not just for the folks that use drugs, but everybody else in the community that needed something. Started dropping in because we didn't have any criteria. You could just come in and ask for what you needed, and we would try and figure it out. So, here we are, 13, 14 years later, the building is there. And, HEPAC owns the building free and clear with no debt, And, we were able to expand it, add a clinic, washer, dryer, showers, the whole 9 yards, we did it. And that building's still there and they're still serving people. And they just had to rent another building because they're so big now.
Wow. And a lot of those fights are still going on. Joy, I mentioned being here in Texas when you were founding the Texas Harm Reduction Alliance, and they're still facing that issue today. They've got neighbors that want to kick them out every year. They've got a whole drama around being in a neighborhood and the folks that hang out around the drop-in center. And, we're talking about how long ago did this happen?
Yeah, this was Oh, this is 15, 16 years ago.
Yeah, so, a decade and a half later, and albeit this is, it's Texas, but it's Austin, and they're trying to kick them out of the building every year,
Well, it's not, I think that, as progressive as California was, we still encounter stigma. And so I don't think that changes. And harm reduction, to me, is still fairly new in Texas. And as progressive as Austin claims to be, there's still stigma.
Yeah.
And the problem is poor people don't want more poor people in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
They just don't, and even though they're already there and they want somebody to do something about it, but they're not quite sure what that looks like. And then when you come with an idea, they're not sure that that's going to be the idea that's going to work. So
yeah. Build another bank or something, put in a shopping mall.
Yeah, put in a coffee shop. That's what they wanted to do, at our site. Like, our site had a liquor store on every corner, like, where we were. It was East Oakland, had a liquor store on every corner and a storefront church on every other corner. And so, one of our opposition was the guy that ran the liquor store. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, you advertise cigarettes at the height of preschool, children walking by, and you're going to talk to me about the dangers of providing safer use equipment to people and help? Like, there's, like, you're a hypocrite, bruh. Shut up.
Yes, thank you.
I wonder, Joy, like, your story is so great, and it's encouraging to see you, like, standing up for yourself so many times. Like, these people are just, like, coming at you from all sides, and you're just like, no, we're going to advocate for people's health. But I wonder, like, how do you not give up? Like, we're seeing these fights play out over and over again. Places like Colorado and California, there's certain areas that have shuttered their syringe access programs. These are so-called progressive states, and, like, there's still a war on it. And Canada is, like, going to shut down 10 supervised consumption sites or something like that. And it's like, it just feels like something as basic as syringe access, which has such a good medical record, and it's just like, it doesn't make any sense not to offer it. We're losing that battle. It's in some places. So how do you not give up?
Well, first of all, I don't work for me. I always say this. I work for Peggy, Danny, Dwight, and Anita. Those are my best friends. 3 of them died from AIDS, and 1 of them was killed in the street because they could not get into treatment because they couldn't stop using. And so for me, I don't care who signs my paycheck, but I know who I work for. And so I get up because I'm dedicating to making sure that people that use drugs have access to everything they need to stay alive. And I'll just keep doing it until I can't do it anymore.
Yeah. Thank you so much for what you've done thus far. I think a lot of us are standing on the shoulders of that work, and harm reduction has these hidden heroes, I think. And there's a lot of limelight seeking now, and there's a lot more of a bureaucratization or institutionalization of the ideas and the practices. But there are people at the foundation of harm reduction that have laid down their lives in order to be where we are. And I see you as one of them. And I just really appreciate you being willing to come on and allow us to use this platform to tell some of this story. What are some of the plans that you have coming down the pipeline? What would you like to see happen? with the remainder, I know you say you're in retirement. Is that even possible for Joy Rucker? What do you want to see happen, or what are you trying to do next?
Well, we are getting the National Black Harm Reduction Network off the ground. We're in the process of completing all our paperwork to become a 501c3. We have a fiscal sponsor, so we're raising money. I've gotten funding to create a mentorship and coaching program for up-and-coming leaders, Black harm reductionists, and coaching for folks that work in primarily white-dominated agencies. How do you navigate that system and keep your mind and keep your job?
Yeah.
So that's my side of the National Black Harm Reduction Network, and Tracy Gardner is focused on policy, anything to do with the drug war, incarceration, mental health services, or lack of all those services for Black folks, and how they're impacted by the system that is not available to them.
Oh, yeah. Tracy's great. I think we'll have to have her on here too to talk about some of that side of things. Well, that's exciting. This is something that's been needed for so long. And I've heard rumblings of a Black user union forming. It just makes sense. Why hasn't it already happened?
Yep.
And I'm just really looking forward to how things can be transformed if people will shut the fuck up and listen to some of this shit. Honestly. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joy. And so if folks want to reach out, what's the best way to follow up? If people either want to get in touch with you or some of the folks that you work with, how should they follow up?
So my email is jrucker@nbhrn@gmail. We are currently working on our website. We have a website designer that is, in the process of giving us samples of what it could look like. So we should have our site up in a month or so. But that's the best way to contact me.
Again, I'm excited. I've seen what Joy can build from the ground up. So we're excited about seeing where that goes. Troy, did you have anything else before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to echo everything Aaron's said. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story.
Thank you. Aaron, I love you. I appreciate all the work that you do, brother. You know that.
Hey, it's people like you that keep me doing it. So keep doing it.
Keep doing it.
All right. Thanks for your time, Joy.
Thank you. All right. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Narcotica, an independent production by Narco Media. Co-hosted and co-produced by Zachary Siegel, Troy Farah, Christopher Maraff, and Aaron Ferguson. I'm your co-producer, Aaron Ferguson. If you like the show, you can find out more at narcocast.com and support us by joining our Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/narcotica. We are excited to announce that a portion of the proceeds from the show will now go toward the Urban Survivors Union, which is the National Drug Users Union, a group of directly impacted advocates for drug user health in America. This is the way social change happens from the ground up, and we are so excited to support this group that is doing such important work to fight stigma against people who use drugs. If you're a patron, you also get free stickers which are personally mailed to you. You can also request a shout out on the show. And now patrons can even get 30% off of merch in our new store, which is at narcocast.myshopify.com. We have t-shirts and coffee mugs, one that says "There are drugs in here," which is awesome. More stuff will be added soon. As always, we're so grateful to the folks that make this show possible. A little goes a long way, so thanks for making Narcotica happen. We're ad-free and we want to keep it that way. If Patreon just isn't for you, that's fine. You can help us out by spreading the word. Tell all your friends about the podcast, advocating for social justice and abolishing the drug war. You can also rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Our theme music is by Glassboy, and Jenny Shea is the voice of Narcotica. Additional music is by myself, alias Nomad1, drug-using producer. Well, I guess that's all. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Until next time.